So when we eat carbohydrates, the carbohydrates will break down in its smallest form into glucose. Glucose is the smallest form of sugar, and every molecule of glucose retains 3 molecules of water. So that means that when glucose is coming through our bloodstream and retaining water, sugar is actually helping to hydrate our body. So sugar is pulling water with it and helping to hydrate our organs, our muscle tissue, our brain. So we actually need a little bit of sugar in our diet. So as it's pulling through, it's going to go into our 3 primary gas tanks. So we have 3 areas where we store the sugar. We store it in our muscle tissue, our liver, and our bloodstream. So what happens when we have too much? We are going to show you. So a little visual representation here. We have 3 storage buckets for where we store carbohydrate. We have our muscle tissue as the larger one. We have our liver as the medium, and then we have our bloodstream as the smaller container. And then the big daddy here is to show what happens when we have too much. This will be our fat storage container. So when we have too much of something and it spills over, it'll go into fat storage. So I'm going to use a little liquid sweetener and put it into my water, just as an example of sugar and water together. So what happens when you eat a meal? Oh, and side note, even excess protein will turn into sugar if it can't be digested and metabolized. And if we're not using it, if you're not using the sugar, it's going to store as fat eventually as well. But let's get back to this guy. So let's say you eat a meal, breaks down in its simplest form into sugar, and then the sugar binds to water and it starts to go through into your bloodstream. So the sugar carries the water with it, it goes into your bloodstream, and then it keeps going. It keeps going to hydrate your liver, your organs, and then it continues to flow into your muscle tissue, making sure that you have enough for muscle contraction. And right here, you'd be pretty good. Like after a meal, you know, you've filled up your muscles, your liver has some, you have a little bit of extra in your bloodstream. It'll naturally spike blood sugar levels to just have a meal in the first place. So that's okay. But what happens if you keep eating? If you keep eating and your body's like, I didn't eat anymore. What happens then is that it just keeps spilling over. And your body doesn't have the storage for that. So what happens then is it just ends up storing as fat. The rest of it stores as fat. So how do we mitigate this? How do we reduce this? A couple things. One, eating in moderation. So eating just enough to what your body can actually put to use, metabolize, and then get on with its life. 2, actually using food combining. So learning how to pair protein and carbohydrates or fat and carbohydrates. Both protein and fat will help to slow the digestion of carbs and make the steady stream of sugar going into those storage tanks a lot slower, which will reduce your possibility or window of overflow. So there's a lot of different ways that you can reduce the overflow result of excess sugar going into fat storage. But this is just a little representation for you guys. Hope it helps. Let's get right back to it.